All right, thank you for staying with us on Citizen Weekend. As promised, I am joined in studio by Dr. Ngala Chome, who is a research fellow at Ghent University in Belgium, and he's a peace and security expert. And we are also joined virtually by Dr. Hassan Kanenje, who is the director of the Horn Institute. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening. We are going to get into the situation that is the Eastern DRC. I'll start with you, Dr. Kanenje. To the best of your knowledge, are things peaceful now in Eastern DRC after the signing of the Washington Accords?
Olive, I wish I could say things are peaceful. Things are better, but certainly not peaceful. In fact, just this past week, there have been accusations and counter-accusations between the government and M23 of violating the Angola-mediated, ceasefire. And so while there's been a lull in recent days in the fighting, things are not exactly peaceful. And I think, of course, more effort needs to be done to ensure that whatever agreements have been reached, whether in the Doha framework or in the Washington Accords, are actually adhered to.
Dr. Chome, I'm curious.
Yes.
Recently, just last weekend, we had the 39th AU Heads of State Summit in Addis Ababa,
Yes.
and the AU EAC SADC panel of facilitators,
Yes.
as far as the DRC is concerned, were present.
Yes.
What is their role in light of we have the US and Qatar
Yes.
involved in this process?
Yes. Thank you, Oli, for having me. Historically, of course, we said the latest iteration, if you like, of the emergence of the M23 group in Eastern DRC is what has gotten us here at this point. And the sort of attempts to mediate or to find peace within this this current context, which we'll say started late 2021 November when M23 re-emerged, had a lot of sort of regional economic units in the region, the East African Community and SADC, very much involved at the very beginning. Kenya itself performed a very instrumental role with what was then called as the Nairobi process, and Angola also with the Luanda process. But up to 2025. We saw the sort of sudden emergence, if you like, almost a surprise, with the entry of Qatar, that for the first time managed to put President Paul Kagame of Rwanda and President Felix Tshisekedi of DRC on one table, and M23 also accepted in the same vein to participate in mediation processes, in a process that then, of course, Washington put its blessings on, but then immediately became tied to this issue of exchange of critical minerals for security guarantees in Kinshasa. What then has happened since then is that you see that there's been almost a marginalization of the African actors that had started the mediation process at the very beginning. Here talking about the East African Community, which, the East African Community Regional Force that was deployed to Eastern DRC had to close in 2023. The SAMI DRC force that was deployed by SADC also did not leave very good outcomes as well. South African forces had to leave as well. So now what you have is, different levels or a hierarchy of mediation processes. And it seems, therefore, that Washington and Qatar actually are the most influential in this mediation process, and African actors have been marginalized or excluded, or their voice or role has been excluded in terms of influencing, especially the president of Rwanda and the president of DRC.
All right, Dr. Kanenje, I'm curious what you have to say in response to that, because President Kagame had spoken about African solutions to African problems. Are you of the same mind that African actors have been sidelined?
Yes, I always like to say it only works, African solutions to African problems when you are having and using African money. In the absence of that, it becomes a challenge. Now, going back to your question, has the African agency been sidelined? Yes, to some extent, but it's not been sidelined by the international community. It's actually been sidelined by the parties to the conflict. A lot of it had to do with the mistrust that the parties to the conflict has on the regional as well as continental processes. whether it's the Nairobi process or the Luanda process, and just absence of commitment to actually African mechanisms in addressing these issues. Of course, sometimes there's a conflict of interest when it comes to some of these processes. However, a lot had to do not so much to do with Africa's lack of capacity to deal with it, but actually just the absence of goodwill from the parties and the mistrust that the parties to the conflict had with regard to the regional as well as continental mechanisms. But I think that is slowly, with the merger of the Luanda and Nairobi process and the support of the international processes, it's likely that perhaps a combination of two may bear some fruit.
All right. It's interesting you bring up the question of mistrust, and I'm going to refer to an article that you penned, Dr. Chome, and this has, there's a part where you talk about ICRAF and
yes.
It having been led by Kenya under, designed
yes.
by Kenya under President Uhuru Kenyatta's yes. administration. You say President William Ruto was not too keen, and thereafter we unceremoniously exited.
Yeah. The
DRC
yes.
To make way for a party that perhaps President Tshisekedi felt would engage the rebel groups M23
yeah.
More fiercely.
Yes.
So you've referenced this mistrust
yes.
before.
Yeah.
To your mind, what does it stem from?
Well, the conflicts landscape in DRC is also, you need to understand this conflict is almost 3 decades coming, you know. So, you know, stems, of course, from the Rwandan genocide of 1994, the movement of people across the border into Eastern DRC. M23 is really a later formation of what you would call you know, groups that have been supported traditionally by Rwanda, but you know, Congolese Tutsis in this case, you know, and of course their connections with Rwandan Tutsis have created that link all across those years. And so therefore the conflict is deeply historical, and these deep histories have generally created a large environment of mistrust.
But can I just read something from your article?
Please,
so you say, President William Ruto, who was elected chair of the EAC Heads of State Summit last November, summoned an extraordinary meeting that was in 2020.
So Ruto becomes the head of the EAC in November of 2024.
Okay.
Yeah.
And at an extraordinary summit to discuss the crisis in Eastern DRC, snubbed by Tshisekedi, he has repeatedly shown disdain. Yes. For Ruto's leadership of ICRAF. The highlight of the virtual conference was a 6-minute rant by Kagame in his defense of the M23 rebels. The Rwandan strongman launched scathing personal attacks against former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta. So it seems like this stems from President William Ruto, former President Uhuru Kenyatta. Why are they, from just reading this piece, are they at the center of these peace negotiations? Why is it such a sensitive issue?
I mean, apologies, I was slowly coming to that. Well, in summary, the Congolese population and in particular President Paul Kagame have always felt that Uhuru Kenyatta was siding with Felix Tshisekedi. Now, the truth is that Uhuru Kenyatta was very pivotal in Felix Tshisekedi becoming president of DRC back in 2018. That after the handshake in Kenya, now known as the political handshake between President Uhuru Kenyatta and the late former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, is that Tshisekedi was then introduced to Uhuru Kenyatta by Raila Odinga. Raila Odinga has had a relationship with Felix Tshisekedi's father, both you know, as both remembered as, you know, opposition figures, leading opposition figures in their own countries. And through that relationship between Felix Tshisekedi and Uhuru Kenyatta is known to have funded Felix Tshisekedi's campaign, making him president later in 2018. And so therefore, there's a long relationship between the two here. And so therefore, when Felix Tshisekedi is not seeing or is not on the same page with Paul Kagame, whom he accuses countless numbers of time to have been behind the M23 rebellion, Uhuru Kenyatta therefore is seen to have been not impartial in this process, especially by Paul Kagame. Hence, him pointing fingers at him and the role he attempted to play through the Nairobi process. Now, naturally, William Ruto, who was Uhuru Kenyatta's nemesis, you say, during the 2022 presidential context, it means that the reflection of this in the Great Lakes region conflict in Eastern DRC is that then William Ruto is now seen to have been an ally of Paul Kagame, and therefore during in the same stroke, then therefore a supporter of M23. In fact, M23 announced its Congo River Alliance in Nairobi when William Ruto was president, and immediately after that,
diplomatic tensions.
Yes, it caused diplomatic tension, and Kinshasa had to recall its ambassador to Kenya because of this. And since then, those tensions have existed. William Ruto, yes, now is the head of the EAC. Felix Tshisekedi has snapped the EAC since joining it in 2022 under the encouragement of Uhuru Kenyatta. But it seems that since William Ruto became president of Kenya, and therefore the head of the EAC, Heads of State Summit, his role has always also been seen as impartial, in this case on the side of President Paul Kagame of Rwanda.
All right. Lastly, Dr. Kanenje, with the insight that you've given, that your sense is that the African players have been sidelined.
Yes.
There was a report, Dr. Kanenje, that spoke about the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed, seeking to mediate a truce between former President Uhuru Kenyatta, President William Ruto, in the interest of peace in the DRC. I'm curious, so what does then that say about Kenya's role in the process?
Olive, well, I was not privy to the secret meeting, if it were there, and I treat it as conjecture because no one knows exactly what happened. But I think it's important to underscore the point that the Nairobi-led East African Regional Force, while it was in DRC, it actually achieved perhaps more success than any other deployment we've seen in recent history. What was followed by this SADC-led summit, it was a disaster, and I think it was all there, for us to see. Now, last year, Kenya still is the country that championed the merge of these two processes. Remember, one of the processes was focusing more on the political aspects, which is the elephant in the room, another one on the military aspects. Now, to the extent that this process can be joined and Nairobi is still championing that, it puts Nairobi actually at the center of this peace process. And so despite some of course, the shenanigans you're going to hear and side shows that we hear a lot because of politics, I think Nairobi is still being looked at and counted to be party to this resolution and to play a central role, especially at a time when the region is left with very, very few actually stable countries that are not already party to the conflict. So Nairobi fundamentally has not exactly been part of the conflict the way some of the parts of the conflict wanted them to be. Perhaps my final point would be just to explain what I think God was also trying to say. There was a fundamental misunderstanding of the mandate of the East African Regional Force and what the role Nairobi was supposed to be playing. Nairobi was not supposed to be there as a partisan group because you can't be mediating a process and at the same time you're part of the conflict. And so that neutrality, unfortunately, both sides viewed it differently. So during the time of President Uhuru, of course, it may have been viewed negatively from Rwanda, and during the time of President Ruto, it may have been viewed again negatively by Tshisekedi. But fundamentally, the role of Kenya was not supposed to be partisan to the conflict. You're supposed to help guide the process of its resolution.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. We've had in studio Dr. Ngala Chome, who is a research fellow at Ghent University in Belgium. And we also have had virtually Dr. Hassan Kanenje, who is the director of the Horn Institute. Next time, gentlemen, we'll get into the question of M23 proposing federalism.
Yes.
They're saying DRC is too large to be managed centrally, governed centrally. Yes. And we've also seen U.S. private security contractors, or reports of U.S. private security contractors engaged in Uvira as well as drones. So there's a lot to this story. We will get into it another time, but first, a break.